Hey guys, it's your favorite video blogger once again, Mr. Brown. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, what was that wonderful piece of music Mr. Brown just played without any mistakes whatsoever? Well, it is Beethoven's Sonata in C minor, Opus 10 number 1. And I know what you're also thinking, where can I learn more about sonatas and everything that comes with it? You come to the right place, because this is our video on Sonata Form and its place in historical context. So I'm about to jump to a PowerPoint, but things I want you to keep in mind while you're watching this incredibly exciting video is take some notes. Also, I want you to come up with one thing that you found quite interesting in the video. I also want you to come up with at least one, perhaps two things that you want to know more about. Also, if you are completely stunned with any kind of term or any kind of concept in the video, make sure you write it down, let me know tomorrow so that we can clear that up before we get started on the more in-depth analysis that we're going to do in class. Right, stay tuned for the PowerPoint presentation. So, Sonata Form is the next logical step after the work we've been doing on fugue. Not because it's longer or because it's more complex or anything, but more so because of its place in historical context. Yeah. Now I include this photograph on the front, and I tend to do it for a lot of things, just to keep it in historical context. Now that's a piece of, I guess, classical architecture, and it's very much based on form, regularity, and balance. And that's one of the things that comes across a lot in Sonata Form and in the classical period in general. So, let's get started. Now, before we go too deep into Sonata Form itself, I want to talk about the terminology because it can get confusing. We have sonata as a form versus sonata as a piece of music. Okay? So, it's both. Foremost, it's a musical form or a musical structure. And that's typically the way we'll talk about it in our classes. All right. As a piece of music, however, it's a large piece of music that has 3 or 4 movements, which are just musical sections, of which the first and the last are normally in sonata form. Okay. So, for example, a piece called a sonata for a solo instrument, such as piano or clarinet or cello, is just called sonata. It usually be called sonata in C minor, like the piece I played for you from the Beethoven then, or sonata, in D by Mozart or whatever. And that's one of the reasons why we have a lot of the catalogs that we use to catalog all the composers' music, because there are a lot of sonatas. Okay. On the other hand, a piece of a sonata in the form of an orchestra is called a symphony. Right? So a symphony is really just a sonata for orchestra. And also, if you have a solo instrument with orchestra, that's called playing a sonata. It's called a concerto. Right? And also we have sonatas for small groups of instruments like trios or quartets, and they're called duos or quartets, and they're often in the same idea as sonata form being a big piece of music with 3 or 4 movements. It has the first and last movement typically in sonata form. All right, and this is the kind of the way it works. We won't go too much into depth of these technical details right now. I just wanted to show you the difference between sonata form, which is this here. Yeah. We have exposition, development, recapitulation, and sonata as it appears if we were talking about a big sonata piece of music, or sonata as a symphony or a concerto. Yeah, the first movement, which is this here, that's the sonata form. Second movement is typically slow. It's not set in stone though. Third movement is quite often like a dance or something in triple time or something a bit of movement. And then the last section is also sonata form. Right? Not all sonata pieces of music fit this template, but the majority of them do. On a side note here, The creation of these large sonata pieces of music that have all these different movements comes from a lot of the earliest kind of dance parties that would be organised by nobility. Yeah, so just the desire to have a few different, types of music that vary the dance a bit. So, after this fast first section, you want something slow to take a breather. Maybe you want something, in a triple meter so that you can dance with a partner. Maybe you want to finish with this with a fast number. So it's derived from that, not directly, but that's one of the influences on it. Okay, so in the historical context, in the 17th century, most of the music that you would hear, doesn't matter how rich you would be, was in the church. It was church music, and it was of the variety that we talked about when we talked about fugue. And it's very polyphonic, it's very complex, and it was meant to kind of represent the complexity of God and the ornate nature of the world. Yeah. So the sonata developed out of a desire for more substantial music, that is longer music, louder and just more grand, but also kind of more easy to understand music. All right. So what was happening around about this time was there was a bit of a rising middle class wanting to actually pay to see music that they wanted to hear, rather than just be served music they heard in church. At the same time, architecture started getting bigger, so it meant that we needed bigger pieces of music to fill these halls and to satisfy the guests that were actually paying to be there. All right? And as I said, it was kind of a reaction against the complexity and the polyphony of all that church music, like, similar to the fugue that we studied. Yeah. It was because sonata form is more homophonic, so it has easy to follow melodic line, and it has harmony or accompaniment. Yeah, so it's a song that you could actually sing along to on your way home, whereas it was much harder to do so with the complex polyphonic church music. All right. There's also coming through here as a kind of a universal standard of certain key relationships, which we'll go into greater detail, particularly in class, because it gets a little bit confusing. But we start to see a kind of universal trend in what keys we go to when. Okay. So the basics form of sonata is in 3 sections that can often be drawn out, and particularly in the classical to romantic era, we have what's called rondo sonata form, and there are variations on it, but we're just going to study the most clearly defined sonata form. All right, the 3 movements are exposition, the development, and the recapitulation. These are the terms you should be taking note of, because these are the terms I'm going to be asking you in class. All right, now this, if we're going to put it down in A and B A form, it looks a lot like rounded binary form, which we've studied earlier. Yeah, it has the exposition, which is the same as A, gets repeated. Then we have a development, which could be our B, and a recapitulation, which is just like the A, and that's repeated together. All right, so we'll see why this recapitulation is similar to an A dash that we have here. All right, so in the exposition, this is where the composer exposes all their ideas. Yeah, usually it's in the form of 2 subjects or 2 themes. Okay, the first theme usually in the tonic, it is the home key. The second theme, usually contrasting, is usually in the dominant. Yeah, so that's the 5th from the tonic. All right, and in between we have a bridge passage, which is similar to the transitions that we're talking about in fugue form. So in other words, we have this the first subject or first theme. In tonic, we need a bit of a bridging passage to take us to the next key, which is the second subject. All right, and then a closing section. Yeah, so we have 2 musical ideas, closing section, bam, that's the exposition. Right, now I'm going to jump to the recapitulation here because it's as you can see, very similar. And in fact, it looks the same with the addition of a coda. The one thing you need to remember though is in the recap, so when the composer recapitulates the ideas of the exposition, the principal subject is typically now in the dominant key, whereas first of all it was in the tonic, and the second subject is usually in the tonic key, and then there's a closing section and a coda, which is just an ending, right? Now the reason for that is we kind of want to do it in reverse so that we can end in the final key. So we have tonic here in the first exposition of the principal subject, dominant in the second subject. Flip it and reverse it for the recap. We have dominant for the principal subject, tonic for the second subject, closing section, usually a whole bunch of scales or arpeggios, coda, which is a whole bunch of big fat chords, if we're talking about Beethoven. Alright, now the development. You can see that there's not really many divisions in this development. That's because it's quite often, it doesn't really follow any kind of internal structure per se. Now what the development is literally taking the principal subject and the second subject and developing them. So what I mean by that is transposing them, inverting the main theme, expanding it out, so augmenting it, playing around with it, playing around with these two subjects, turning them into something kind of different, before we get to hear the subjects again. So really something that seems quite complex, this big long piece of music, is really just a kind of a variations on two different subjects, with some scales in between to transition us between keys, and a nice big ending. Now, I've kind of put in the next slides, just written out what I've just spoken about. I'll just spend a few seconds on each of them now in case you want to pause and actually just go into greater depth, but if not, just we'll cover this in class and go into greater depth. Okay, but I'll just spend a few seconds on the next few slides, and then we'll talk about some of the common composers. All right. Okay, so our major sonata players. Now keep in mind there are a lot of composers of sonatas. These are just kind of the three big ones. We have Joseph Haydn, who is also called Papa Haydn because he's the teacher of these other two gentlemen. He composed 104 symphonies, 62 sonatas, and a whole bunch of concertos and quartets, etc., etc. So he wrote a lot of sonata-based music. Mind you, they're usually a bit shorter and a bit more straightforward than, say, Beethoven's, but still very, very impressive. Then we have our man Mozart, 68 symphonies, 18 piano sonatas, lots of concertos. He also had a gambling problem and was obsessed with toilet humour and wrote a piece called Leck mich im Arsch, which you don't need to be fluent in German to work out what that means. And then my favourite, my man Beethoven, 9 symphonies, working on a 10th, 32 piano sonatas, which are incredible, and it's a lot of the go-to repertoire for lots of pianists, and obviously wrote a lot of concertos, always dedicating sonatas to his ladies, all the girls, but he died a bachelor, so I don't know, that didn't seem to go so well for him, and started going deaf in his early 30s. So it makes it even more incredible that he managed to compose so many great sonatas. Right, so in class we're going to analyse a symphony as sonata form. We're also going to analyse a piano sonata. You might want to check out, you probably know it, Beethoven Symphony No. 5. It's the famous ba 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 bum, ba 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 bum. but we'll do that in class. Remember to come to me with, or remember to write it down rather. One thing you found quite interesting about Sonata Form, or in its historical context, and a couple of things that you want to know more about, and make sure you write down anything that didn't make sense to you. Alright, I'm signing out now, but I will see you in class for some epic sonata analysis.